Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Jones for putting me on the program last that I may stew in my anxieties. But we're here. This morning I would like to share a story with you, a brief story on the pioneers of faith, the pioneers of this church, Pilgrim Rest, in which I'm so proud to be able to stand upon that legacy. Pioneers of faith. In 1952, the late Reverend C.V. Harrington, being led by God, established a house of worship along with his wife, Susie Harrington, and their children. And this house of worship was known as the Charity Mission, which later on was organized into a regular Baptist church being named Pilgrim Rest Missionary Baptist Church. And after some time, Pilgrim Rest grew and Pilgrim Rest progressed, which calls for a need of expansion. And being led by the Spirit again, the church sought to expand. Thus, they purchased a tract of land on 2567 North 8th Street and paying for it with cash by coming up with various and creative ways of raising money, baby contests and things of that nature. And so by faith, once again, they purchased this tract of land with nothing on it. And as we know, with any new endeavors that one tries to embark on, they face many struggles and a lot of things to contend with, specifically three major crises in building of Pilgrim Rest. The first major crisis occurred when they excavated the basement. And after excavating the basement, there were only $500 left in the building fund. And prior to that, a torrential rainstorm had came to the city and bombarded the building and caused all the walls to collapse. And faced with only a one-week ultimatum to rebuild the walls by the city, they were faced with a great crisis with only $500 left. Indeed, not enough money to rebuild those walls. And once again, only 1 week to have those walls rebuilt. Otherwise, the city would have shut the project down. And however, Pastor Harrington, being of faith once again, was able to go to the board of the building supervisors, and he was able to persuade them to give Pilgrim Rest an extension to complete the building of the walls. And also he remembered a story or article he read about a millionaire oil person who had the practice of helping churches that were in distress. And so he reached out to this millionaire oil person and he procured a $10,000 loan from this person. And thus, Pilgrim Rest were able to rebuild those walls within that 1 week ultimatum. And now all seems to be well, but as we know, when something goes right, then something else comes along to try to throw a monkey wrench into the plans. And so thus, the joy did not last long, as once again, the money was exhausted. And there was no money left to continue building the church. And having sold the previous building that they once were in, they were now forced to vacate that building because the new owners were ready to move in. And so now with no money left to continue the project and no place to go, then the church was faced with a great crisis, and then the membership started to become disappointed and discouraged. And then you had people grumbling, people crying, and people leaving the congregation. And as we know, there is nothing new under the sun. Despite all of that, once again, being led by the Spirit, First Lady Susie Harrington contacted Mrs. Artie Halyard of the Columbia Savings Loan and Company, the only black savings and loan and company in Milwaukee at that time. She contacted Mrs. Halyard and explained the situation that Pilgrim Rest was going through. And being moved by the faith and sincerity of First Lady Susie Harrington and of the congregation, Mrs. Halyard talked to the board of directors. Now, mind you, the Columbia Savings and Loan had previously denied Pilgrim Rest a loan in the past. But Mrs. Halyard, on behalf of Pilgrim Rest, spoke to the board of directors, and she was able to persuade them to give Pilgrim Rest a loan that they once had denied before. And the loan was worth about $24,000. And with that money, Pilgrim Rest was able to continue to build on this new building. And so now all is well as one would think would be, but then there's another issue that came up. Nearing the completion of the building, another crisis arose. With only 1 week left to finish the building, the permit was rapidly expiring. And once again, Pilgrim Rest ran out of money. And so now with only 1 week left on the permit to complete the project and no money left, what were Pilgrim Rest supposed to do? They had no money. They had no place to go. All they had was a basement and some walls standing. And so once again, being moved by the faith and determination of Pilgrim Rest, Mrs. Halyard again went to her board of directors and appealed to the board of directors on behalf of Pilgrim Rest to provide more money for the completion of the building. Now, the board of directors had a dilemma. See, they had already went up to their limit of set policy that they had in loaning monies to certain organizations. But because of her constant intercession on Pilgrim Rest's behalf, they once again conceded and provided another loan of about $8,000 to Pilgrim Rest so that Pilgrim Rest can complete the building. And so thus, on Easter Sunday, 1962, Pilgrim Rest held its first service in its new edifice with some guidelines in place that certain things had to be done, but Pastor Harrington went and appealed to the city to be able to hold those services in spite of incompletion of the building. And so I thought about that. Easter Sunday. We know that on Easter Sunday, Jesus rose from the dead. And what that meant for us is new life, new beginning. And so now Pilgrim Rest, this new edifice, is starting a new beginning and a new chapter in their lives. And Pilgrim Rest was not only built by an all-black enterprise, which comprised of a black architect who designed it. It was financed by the only black savings and loan company in Milwaukee, being led by the Halyards. It was also assisted by a black plumber and a black attorney, Clarence Parrish. And it was mostly built by all black contractors. But that's not only the great thing that distinguished Pilgrim Rest. The great thing that distinguished Pilgrim Rest back then was it had the distinction of being the first church in Milwaukee to be built from the ground up by an all-black congregation. And as I look at that, and I see where we come from all those years ago to where we are now standing in this beautiful edifice here, when we had to make sacrifices to move over here, we went through trials and tribulations and struggles. We went through grumblings and moanings and even through people leaving. But yet again, we continue that legacy, standing on faith, believing and trusting in God, and moving because we know that God is going to lead the way. And thus, once again, I'm so proud to stand on the backs of pioneers of faith. Thank you.